This is the first episode of a video series where I'm adapting material design components for web. These guys. Code labs, the code labs of this is where you can find these 5 code labs. To a project initialized with create React app and TypeScript. I'm going to use React function components with the new game-changing React hooks exclusively. I have already created a GitHub project, MDC 101, and I cloned it here. So the next step is I have already created a branch called MDC Web 101 within this MDC 101 project, and then I initialize it with React app dot TypeScript. Excellent. So this installed React 16.7.0, but this version doesn't support hooks, React hooks. So I have to install explicitly an Alpha 2 version which supports hooks. So npm install React at 16.7.0 dash alpha.2 and React DOM at 16.7.0 dash alpha.2. I guess that's it. Yes, these are the versions today that support React hooks. The next is I'm going to install the material components web npm install material components dash web. Excellent. So in the node modules we have this material and the button list CSS. These are the files I'm going to use, as well as some of the material component JavaScript file, for example repo, which is a JavaScript package or sub package. Right. The next is where I'd love to add an additional parameter, which is called to the TypeScript config, which is down level iteration, which is required for the for of constructs. This is true. Excellent. So practically these are the installation for this video, and then we can npm start. Okay, so this is the TypeScript version of the starter application. I open the console. Right, so in this video I don't start right away the very first tutorial, but before that I'll do some initialization, getting started, because I'm not using the initialized starter setup environment initialized here. Instead, I'm using create React app in my version. So we have our application up and running, and the only file I'm going to modify is this. We don't need this guys at all. I don't need a component. Instead, because I'm going to use state as well as use effect, these two that I'm going to use. So for the class, I use a const up let me just use a regular lambda function equals props, and the types I just define any here. We don't need this function here. Okay. So in this function, I simply create a button component with click me. Yep. This is the function. Yes, this is just a regular button. What I'm going to do is extracted all the information available here. If you read this documentation on this material components-web readme file, it has a separate getting started guide, as well as this document has its own quick start part either, and it contains a hell lot of very useful information, the quick start demo, and this one, and the quick start demo on Stack Blitz that very useful. I learned quite a lot from this, how to use this application, the Google MDC web components. Okay, so we have it, this button, and the next step to give it a style, and to be able to do that we have to import first that material dash button dash this that MDC dot button, very important, this is MDC dot min dot CSS. That's the first thing, and here we can use the class class name MDC dash button. Just save it, check out. Yes, we have a nice button. We can click it. The next step would be to add the first job, to define our state component. Here const clicks, this is the number of clicks, and then set clicks, and we use the use state function, and let's start with 0 as an initial value for this component, and here change it clicks. Okay, it's click 0. Okay, so it displays 0, but it doesn't create because the set click is not called. So the next step is to define an on click function for it, because this is a functional component, and the whole concept of these React hooks are to get rid of the class-based components. Therefore we are not going to use this anymore, and one of the problem that the event handlers will not support the this keyword doesn't exist anymore, so therefore we can use any function. So just for the say, normally I use lambda function because they are easy to use and short, but here just to demonstrate I create a function which simply calls set clicks plus 1. Okay, going back. Excellent. So it clicks nicely. So the next step would be to use the effect function. Why do we need the effect function? The reason is that when we have a look, it doesn't have this very nice rippling effect of the button, because this ripple effect when the button is clicked is produced by the ripple JavaScript component of material design. So how to link this regular HTML button component with the JavaScript is first, let's import the ripple component at material / ripple. Okay, but what we need here is we have to give it a name, and let's call it MDC Ripple. We have immediately a TypeScript issue, could not find a declaration file. So the reason is that these DTS files are not defined for the material components web package. They are available for MDC React, but this project is not about MDC React. This is about MDC Web, where I directly use these styles from MDC Web. And MDC Web doesn't have TypeScript definitions for their JavaScript elements. So for the sake of simplicity, I simply ignore this line here, but only for this line. And then the next thing that we have to link this button to the ripple component. And the way we could do that, or should do that, is that let's define a use effect, and the use effect function here I could use either a function syntax, for the sake of variety let's just use this lambda expression or fat arrow syntax. So here first I find my buttons, const buttons, and document dot query selector all. We are going to find all our buttons, MDC dash button. So that is, it returns this call all the components with the type, with the class MDC button, and then for each of them, for const button of buttons, I call MDC ripple. Remember, we don't have TypeScript definition, so from the top of the, actually from this documentation, the getting started documentation, I know that we have attach to button. this is what we have to call. That is, each of these buttons we connect to the ripple component attached to. We have no errors. Compiling, let's go back. Oh, okay, you see? So we have now this nice rippling effect. To make sure that it is really called, console log effect executed. Okay, effect executed. So every time it is executed. However, we don't have, this is not a performance issue, but when we have a lot of these components, this shouldn't be executed all the time. Normally it should be executed only once when this component is really mounted or created, and for this we should add this code here. Let's save it, and then it's effect executed. When I click, you see any number of times this effect is not executed. It is executed only once. The reason is that the second parameter for the effect is a filtering or rule when this use effect is executed. If it's empty, every time when the component, when this function is called, that is whenever it is rendered, after rendering this function is called all the time. When we have this, it means that it is only called once. We can also define here the clicks. This is the other possibility. Whenever the clicks is changed, this use effect is executed. Let's check out this again. Click, click, it is again executed. So the concept, whoever designed this interesting or nifty syntax or behavior, so if you remove here, you explicitly say that this use effect is not dependent on any of the states, so please invoke this only when the component is mounted on once. So that's why it is executed this way. And the last possibility which I want to show you is the props. We could define an initial value here. We could define here a type. We are in TypeScript. We can define here initial, which is a number. This is a type definition. When I save it, you can see immediately this app component is complaining that in the index tsx we don't define the initial value. I don't want to change this, so how can I make it optional and to give it a default value? First, I just enter a question mark and everything works, but we don't have a default initial value. And one of the possibilities which I love most, we can use destructuring in the props and replacing the props with initial equal to maybe 19. Let's save it. Coming back. Oh, this 19 is brilliant, but it is great, so it is not used. Let's replace this 0 with initial, save it. Now the clicked is 19, and we can use it as a default value for initials. Of course, we can explicitly define here. I press Ctrl spacebar, and then, as you say, initial is entered here. Maybe let's use just 8. Save it, and now we have 8. When we delete it, we come back to the 19. So as a quick recap, what we have done is I have shown how to use the functional components with TypeScript. I've included a button component here using a CSS from the material package, and I also included from the material package a Ripple JavaScript component. And this JavaScript component, I used an effect, a hook, an effect hook from React to connect it with the buttons. Of course, when you use MDC React, you don't have to do this trick because it is included in the integration, the adapters, the button adapters to the CSS files. And also I used here a state hook for the usual clicking, and for OnClick event handler I used a regular JavaScript function. Intentionally I didn't use. We can even add a name here. This is quite normal too. Of course, it's not necessary. We can use this, and of course, for simplicity, we can return back to this shorthand format. This is exactly the same. A number of ways are available for us in JavaScript. It's really a flexible language. Of course, here we could also use a different regular function app, the parameters, yes, we don't need this here. Yeah, this is another possibility. Let's save it. This is another syntax. And the last one, which is quite often used, where we can use a TypeScript definition from here, which is called function component. So this is a typical TypeScript Fortunately, React DOM is full of TypeScript definitions, so the developer team of React absolutely support TypeScript. So therefore we have a function component, and one of the possibility of using const app, here we can define the type as function component, and then a type definition like so, and here the equal sign. We don't need this dot here anymore. Let's use the fat arrow. This is another possibility where we use this generic, this is called generic type definition, where this is the type for the props parameter. Let's give it a try too. This is another syntax that you can find quite often. What else I wanted to show? Yeah, there is another possibility. Instead of function, you could use react.srf sfc, yes, this is other possibility. This stands for stateless functional component. However, this is misleading here, because this, with the hooks, the state hooks, functional components can be stateful in React starting with 16.7 version. So therefore I prefer functional component, but honestly it really doesn't give a lot more. I prefer this I don't need this here. We can define the type here like so. This is the shortest form, which is exactly this version. Okay, so that was the initial getting started. So the next video I'm going to actually start implementing the MDC 101 components with the text fields, add buttons, and so on and so forth. Now that we have an environment which was initialized from scratch, from ground up, completely with the latest version for our needs.